Why don't we dig right in and what are some of the key pain points that technology has successfully addressed in bond formation governance and consistency for new issuance? Were you guys on Zoom able to hear that well enough? Okay, good. All right. Well, pick one. Go. Seriously. Yeah, get started. Get it rolling.
Might have a few points on this. I guess what I'll start first is one of the perils of having been in the media industry for at least a couple of decades. I won't say how many, but that is that I have a number of roles, and I just have to disclose that I'm here in my role as the former CEO of the City of Chicago and not my most board member on the MSRB. The question you ask, I think, has a lot to do with, broader municipal market structure, as well as how is it that we have provided for transparency of information to bond investors, and it's an ever evolving industry and area of development for the muni industry. I think as was discussed in the last panel, we are somewhat lagging in that respect, and there's a lot of work to do. Emma, we all remember NERCers at one point and how hard it was to get information, and then now you can get onto Emma, and there's continuous developments there as it relates to transparency of information. But that we need to do more. And part of the challenge with that is that there are a lot of small municipal issuers where surmounting that investment to get to better transparency of data is insurmountable, frankly, for them. Mm-hmm. So trying to figure out a contract for that, I think, is critically important. How is it that we can create one-stop shops for them to be able to get to that, bridge that operational challenge to that technological ideal state that we want to be in, to create that transparency so that the municipal market can be more liquid. Again, as was mentioned in the last panel, there's a lot of benefits all around, but we have to find a way to be able to bridge that gap.
Bethany, Megan?
Well, I would say from my perspective, in terms of sort of monitoring, both in the context of in primary debt execution, a lot of information that's useful to the bond pricing process in terms of sort of electronic or digital information with respect to orders and sort of managing order flow. And from our perspective as an advisor to our clients, to think about that data and use it to analyze negotiation processes is helpful, and also in the context of just ability to better aggregate secondary trade data to inform ongoing debt management and monitoring and investor relation opportunities. I think we've seen technology really evolve in terms of, this is sort of piggyback on Jenny's point a little bit, just ongoing continuing disclosure information and making information easily accessible to investors through whether that's internal or external platforms or what have you. So I think just data and information accessibility in general, both from a primary perspective and a secondary market perspective, has been super beneficial.
And I'll chime in.
Yeah,
we need to mute.
Yeah, please jump in.
Oh.
Perfect. I'll chime in with a little bit of, let's say, a step from the public sector angle. And what I'd like to maybe express, Barnett, is that there's a shift that's really reshaping the public sector. And I think one that's taking place across governments of all levels, from federal down to micro local. And it's a digital revolution. The transformation, I firmly believe, is being driven by two forces. One is necessity, and the other is innovation. And so from a necessity standpoint, if there's one thing the pandemic underscored for governments, it's that so many of our systems were outdated. Decades old, aging technological infrastructures, they simply could not adapt quickly enough to allow for remote work, if they could even function remotely, and certainly couldn't provide digital services that, frankly, our customers, our residents, our taxpayers have come to expect. So the urgency of modernization became really apparent, right? So as governments have become, and really dedicated to rebuilding, reimagining their operations, not just to get by, but to effectively serve in the future, I believe this is a perfect confluence with the fact that there's an incredible amount of technology and big ideas, so many of whom are in the room with you right now, who are embodying that second force, which is innovation. So the next, like, I think really important part of this is, as this innovation is happening, new technology is not just reshaping how governments, perform our operations, but how, frankly, every single part of issuance workflows occur. We're going to see this kind of continuation of a beautiful transition to more digital platforms, allowing for greater efficiencies, more transparency, and frankly, more knowledge. And that's the part that I think is important to harness. That is the ability to use that data. It's not just having it, but its ability to actually use it. And I think forward-thinking governments are starting to really embrace that data and using, AI to really sleuth through it to enhance our work and to make really a lot more informed decisions. So bigger than the picture of just primary issuance, it's how do we really grow our governments and take advantage of this opportunity of this confluence right now.
You've teed us up for the next question, which is, can you share specific examples where data analytics and automation have led to better outcomes for bond issuers and their working group members? And jump in wherever you'd like to jump in.
Well, I would just add, Jared.
Oh yeah, please.
Yeah, if you,
Oh, hi, Matt.
Hey. First of all, thank you all for coming today. We really appreciate it. Jay, thank you for joining us and sharing your insights. Wearing many different mats. I'd say if you think about the incubation of debt in the municipal market, there are a myriad of folks who are involved with this process. And to Megan's point about antiquated channels or infrastructures, that has continued to permeate into 2024. However, as time has gone on, right, I think we're finally at that inflection point where folks do want to adapt and are continuing to really hone in on the fundamental core infrastructure that not only helps their firm, but also their issuer clients. That to me is super exciting.
So just to add to your comments, oh, the mic's working. Just to add to your comments, technological investment is ultimately about infrastructure, and municipals are not new to the fact that we have a lot of deferred maintenance, and infrastructure is one of them. I think that as we think about automation, for example, one of the critical motivating factors for many municipals, the city of Chicago being one of them, the University of Chicago being another one of them, is budget cuts, and how is it that you are able to continue to operate at a highly efficient level, but without the infrastructure that you need in order to do that. And some specific examples of that, for example, at the University of Chicago, we have bots, for example, that will go and do a lot of the payables processing that a person currently does, really 2 or 3 full-time FTEs, but that you can have done more efficiently with less costs, with less pensions, with less benefits associated with that, that help to create more efficiencies that then allow for us to free up folks to do more of some of the higher level operational needs of the institution. So to a bit of what Megan was saying, there are a lot of reasons for why it is we're starting to see, cases in point of automation and technology being able to help us operationalize our business. Going back to the muni market and some of the bond issuances that we do at the City of Chicago, we explored and began a process of looking into becoming compliant with some of the regulations coming down the pipeline for FDTA. And in that process, we talked to our top 10 investors, asked them, one, from a business perspective, would this be helpful to you? I think we heard from the last panel that there is a lot of desire for that. The fact that our financials are delayed as it relates to your ability to take a look at information and digest that information, analyze it, and include it in our credit analysis is a challenge. And in particular, a challenge for the city of Chicago, which on any given year, somewhere between the, call it like 9th to 15th largest issuer in the country, that you don't have that information real time. And in the meantime, the city of Chicago spends a ton of time through investor conferences and other means to try to reach out to investors, makes a very large investment in that respect. Making our financials more immediately transparent to you is, one of the probably first things we could do to be able to get that information out to investors.
The early areas, for us with AI was really using it to comb through disparate sets of data to quickly sleuth through all of that data. And I want to kind of like imagine for those of you in the room, this kind of almost power is like making previously impossible tasks possible. And so, for example, every single community in this country has a different revenue structure. In the city of Columbus, we are an income tax driven city where about 80% of our revenues come from a single source of revenue, income tax. So you can imagine about every 2 weeks when we see people's paychecks, their wages, we kind of have a good idea as to how our economy is performing. So just put yourself like in my shoes, and by thinking through different policies that we could implement that could create, if you will, a self-fulfilling prophecy to be able to kind of build the city that we aspire to be. Things like, the investments in childcare, certain investments in education, investments in infrastructure. They all three have incredible multiplier effects. But because of AI, we now have the ability to measure that in ways and to evaluate it. That's been pretty incredible. With respect to bond issuance, and kind of the disclosure piece, we've used it to pull quickly comparisons together. So, for example, looking at something like climate without standardization, we find comfort in pulling a lot of kind of cities and just reading them all at the same time and comparing how different governments disclose. That's a really great thing to do using AI. Another thing that I think is what really motivates me right now is as we grow towards FDTA, recognizing that there's still a lot of nuance and rules to understand. But as we grow towards that, all of the rote tasks that we do today, which we laboriously spend time on extracting data from PDFs so that we can do our own comparisons about things like sized water and sewer systems, like sized governments, other AAA metrics, rating agency methodologies, all of these functions that are currently living as kind of, I should say, static methodologies or Excel models. Each one of those has the potential of becoming a living, breathing ecosystem where I could quickly query, as the elected CFO of a big city, I could quickly query, give me all of your data last 5 years for all of these sets of issuers and have this brought to me in instantaneously. And as we grow towards that, Barnett, like what I envision is not just governments getting better, but the delivery of private services. Each one of you in that room will be more informed about governments, and we'll get better pitches, we'll get better decks from just about every industry possible.
Thank you. There's so much there. We could dig into any number of these for like another hour, but so I feel kind of bad. We have to jump a little bit ahead. How can technologists and issuers work together to build more user-friendly solutions that fit the unique needs of municipalities? Matt, why don't you offer some suggestions on this?
Well, it's funny. So on the way out here, I was sitting next to an individual who mentioned she worked in munis, and what she said, and I have it in my notes, is paper everywhere. That has changed. So how can issuers and technologists work closely together? Well, I believe it's a function of actually bringing together all the participants that play a process. As mentioned earlier, right, if you only have a subset of the market that is actually adapting to new technology, it tends to slow down progress overall. But what I would say in general is firms or individuals who dismiss the advancements available become dismissed. And we have seen that in the past year since our last MuniTech event. And I think that's a pretty firm example of why it's important right now for many different parties to embrace technology and work with folks. It's not a function of eliminating jobs. It's a function of empowering the municipal bond market to continue to move forward.
Bethany, do you have any thoughts on that? I'm looking to you because you're advising clients, and what are you talking to them about? What are you hearing from them?
Yeah, no, I think Megan actually did an excellent job of summarizing, I think, some of the considerations as it relates to information gathering and really being able to funnel through some things. So when you talk about sort of pricing execution and positioning for a client, I think the two things that come to mind in the context of having data available for building a credit story to the market and to the credit rating agencies, comparables data that Megan mentioned is a really big part of that, right? And we know from a ratings perspective, all of the agencies have metrics, so there's a quantitative piece to this, which usually that data is easily accessible, but there's also the qualitative considerations of it. So when you look at, and as methodologies change, particularly it become more sensitive to, well, what's the latest language, what's the latest rating review that might inform some of the qualitative considerations that the agencies have and how that might impact my particular client. So access to that type of information or ways to sort of funnel that data more quickly and easily accessibly, I think would be a competitive advantage just in terms of preparing the credit story, both again for the markets and the agencies. And then in the context of pricing data, the quicker, the more rapidly we have access to primary market pricing data from transactions across the across the country, and can leverage that for the benefit of our clients who are in the process of negotiated pricings. I think that's really powerful information. So quickness of access, ease and quickness of access to information in those contexts particularly. I think to the point that Matt was making as it relates to, and we've seen, right, the evolution away from paper. I think about when I first started in the industry, there was a room in our office dedicated to transcripts, right, for bond issuances. When you do a bond issuance, you got all the various documents associated there with in a big old black book that's bigger than a dictionary that's sitting on a shelf. And then the evolution of that went from paper transcripts to CDs. And so I have like 100 CDs from that time when that was the technology. And now you just get a link from bond counsel and you have all that data accessible. And I think we're going to see the evolution of that in sort of in all scopes of information. I think what's going to be interesting is that some of that data from the CD and the paper days, figuring out how to distill all that information because it's still relevant to our clients in the context of potentially refinancing debt and restructuring debt. So how do we still extract and potentially digitize the old information while continuing to develop the new information so that it's word searchable and readable and easily accessible to distill information from it to help our clients make informed decisions?
Yeah, the ease and accessibility I think is going to be a repeating theme for all of us today with that. So I'm glad you raised that. And there's another question that kind of flows with it. How have organized data and automation helped municipalities and their advisors with limited resources streamline the bond issuance process? And is there, the muni market, as we know, is made up predominantly of small issuers. We hear obviously about the large transactions. One statistic was that from the MSRB was like roughly 90% of transactions that come to market are under 100 million. And if I've got that off, it's not going to be by much. So it's predominantly either smaller issuers or smaller issuance, not to confuse the two. How does having organized data and automation help bond issuers, particularly those with smaller, smaller resources, limited resources?
I'm going to offer that at this point, it's really hard to make that business case. And my response actually to this previous question would be that what's really important for us to do is to be able to make the case for a return on investment for technology. In any capital planning for any issuer, it's all about priorities and how you set those priorities. And for me, in any organization that I've been in, technological investment is one of the easiest business cases to make, because in theory, there's a self-paying function to that. There isn't. You shouldn't really be doing the project to begin with. But that if you can make that case, which is really the hard part, is how you make that case in a way that an issuer can actually budget it and understand and realistically assume those savings in the out years. That return on investment is a really important part of then saying, yes, we want to go make the technological investments that help to create these efficiencies. In the bond market, that case should be really very easy. One, because a PV01 on a transaction is so much greater than whatever investment in technological improvements to create transparency is going to cost. And I think that divergence is fairly large. so that we should be able to make that case. But yet there are always competing priorities that come in, and how you can help issuers to be able to make that case internally to make those investments are really important. I think that for small issuers, unfortunately, the problem is that that case doesn't really exist for them in this current moment. I serve on the board of a number of nonprofits, many of whom have very, very small issuances. And cost of issuance, even if they're not large in dollar amounts, can mean a whole heck of a lot more on a $3 million transaction than a $1 billion transaction. And finding a way to create staple on one-stop shops for small issuers who are really in and out once a decade, maybe once every 5 years on very small transactions, that's something that we have to figure out.
I would just quickly chime in based on our experience working with a myriad of different parties in the market. What we have found is that certain firms or entities struggle with oversight, governance, supervision, record keeping, simply because the medium of exchange, how this information is being transmitted, typically has been over the phone, as Hector mentioned, for that Goldman deal, or through emails. Recently, you saw an announcement by the SEC for municipal advisors who failed to have good records for communication surrounding deals. I think that is very important to address, and hopefully technology aids in actually eliminating or reducing, significantly reducing the amount of errors that may happen during these transactions.
Yeah, there's another question that we were batting about earlier, that we were wondering about firms that have been fined for poor record keeping, and how can available technologies assist in organized and transparent reporting? It may or may not go to issuers. Actually, it's a question, Matt, I know you could certainly dig into that, but I'm wondering if there's something that issuers and their advisors might offer as to how they would help with their clients, or talk to their clients and their issuers with that. That question wasn't clear enough. It wasn't very clear to me either, so we can do it again if you want. Well, Matt, why don't you jump in and I'll clarify?
Oh, sure. All right. Well, I mean, thanks. So I would say overall, just, being my former setting on a desk, right? Let's talk about new issue pricing, where an underwriter is having a conversation with a municipal advisor about order flow or oversubscription, et cetera. It shouldn't be too hard to actually model or document why a certain decision was made and what the actual impact was to the borrowing cost, as you mentioned. These are simple factors. I just generally believe a lot of this has just been so heavily dependent on email or other means that it hasn't been configured for a muni scenario. And so oftentimes, if you look at munis as an asset class, or you look at corporates, they run very differently. A lot of that is because there hasn't been much change. But I think that change is here now, and that's been really positive for folks, and I think it's only going to get better.
Thank you. We've touched on the next question a little bit, and this maybe helps codify it a little bit more. Looking ahead, what technological advancements or innovations do you see on the horizon that could significantly impact the way municipalities issue bonds? Or put another way, what would make your life easier technologically? Well, for distribution, not just day to day, obviously, but for distribution, to get the story across better, to get more access to lower interest rates, and all that. Megan, why don't you?
Yeah, so interestingly, the reason we're not there in person is because Bethany and I have a soft spot for spending time with, I'll call them our bread and butter governments in our right now we're in Ohio, but in the Midwest, in our country. Governments who are not AAA, triple cities with a huge bench of experts. But where I'm from, Barnett is a town of 5,000 on the Ohio River, and they are struggling. That CFO, who is the CFO, she's also doing payroll. She's probably running the parks department, and she's going to catch, the dogs that run free. Like, she is all over the place. And that's what inspires me with the use of technology, because we've talked about this throughout this entire session, but the first thing is it's helping with just capacity issues, right? That's number one. The education piece. Matt, you touched on this a little bit, which is the mitigation of vulnerabilities. And what I'll say is, like, as finance professionals, when that CFO is handling so many things, she is going to greatly benefit from technology being able to help think through both access to capital, highest and best use of those resources, pair up her capital needs with available funding. And then we had amazing amount of questions. Bethany and I presented to a group, a lot of whom were from rural Midwest. And the questions were around things like, well, for example, the Inflation Reduction Act, an incredible amount of federal funds available, but how do they wrap around life cycle cost inclusive of those tax credits? And what I envision, I'm going to say the word like digital twins, if you will. I think as technology really assists in vetting some of these kind of, opportunities in the financing structures, we will look forward to a time when other municipalities downstream are able to quickly benefit from those, if you will, digital twins to help make more informed decisions relevant to their respective communities.
That's great. Jenny, you obviously have worked with some larger issuers. What's your perspective on this?
My number one ask would be for us to see, as issuers, to be able to see better data on our pricing in the market. We have information on Emma around secondary market trades, but I mean, most of you have been on there. It's, right now it's the listing of where your trades have been. In order for me to get what my spread to MMD is, and how is it that you're looking at that secondary market trading? One, it's not easily accessible. Two, I have to go and do the work or have an underwriter do the work of the analysis of where that trading is, because it's not in a format that gives me good data analytics. I know that a number of firms are making a lot of investments in those analytics so that they internally have that data for their own desks and how it is that they interact with the markets. But for municipal issuers, it's very difficult to be able to get that information. And in particular, as we're seeing more issuers engage in tenders, for example, which you need a fairly good view of where it is your bonds are valued, having that information would be critically important to creating liquidity in the market, in particular for issuers, and that data transparency.
I find this we were talking earlier. I said I find this fascinating. I could go on for this for another hour, but Bethany, actually, this one is probably more aligned with you. How are advisors ensuring that their clients are getting the best possible prices, and what's driving the preference for negotiated versus competitive? Yeah, right.
Sorry about that. I think the specifics of as it relates to the bond sale methodology question, it really has a lot to do with two things. Sometimes it's just about market volatility, right? And depending upon the particulars of your transaction, how complex it is, how much of a story you have to tell. That's a lot, oftentimes, the policy consideration around doing a negotiated transaction versus competitive for established credits. I think generally speaking, an easier sort of rule of thumb is the less story you have to tell, either because it's an established versus a new credit or project. It is a highly rated versus not highly rated entity. The easier the story to tell, all else being equal, unless there are other policy considerations around syndicate, designation firm, so on and so forth, the easier the story, the more aligned or likely for competitive issuance. Again, all else being equal and in market stability. We haven't necessarily had market stability as of late, and so those factors, harder story, harder, more complicated credit, or market volatility lean to the negotiated transactions. Again, all else being equal, and it's very issuer specific, very market specific as well. Restate for me the second part of your question, please.
It was what's driving the preference for negotiated versus competitive? And just sort of a follow-up question on that, actually, what you're saying is what data are you collecting and using to advise your clients on what the best paths are, and what metrics might you be focused on as to what is influencing different, different paths that they may pursue in their issuance.
Yeah, we're fortunate at PFM just because of our market size, share, and presence that we devote have a lot of dedicated resources to pricing and to developing data aggregation, right? So for all of our clients' pricing, particularly the negotiated pricings, we've got all the data around cost of issuance, around pricings and repricings and market tone and investors, so that that information we can leverage for the benefit of our clients, be it the same clients or new clients the next time they're in the markets. So like who the buyers were, what were the market conditions, what did we go out at, what were we able to adjust to, all of that information. Once you have it, you can build on it, right? So and lever for future issuances for the benefit of the client. But you have to have that data sort of easily accessible and filterable, if you will, and in a database. And so we have folks who actually manage that so that it's easily accessible for us to leverage for the benefit of our clients. And I think that's to Jenny's point, right? You really, as service providers in the industry, there's an ROI for investing in the technology to be able to manage that information so that we can leverage it for the benefit of our clients. If you're an issuer, it's a little harder to pull that information and to distill it in a way that's going to be useful in real time for decision-making processes.
Yeah, no, please go ahead, Jen.
Yeah, just to add to Bethany's point, as an issuer, in terms of our decision making around negotiated versus competitive, what can be really hard is if you have to sell, say, $1 billion+ deal in the market, and for institutional needs, and not knowing whether you're going to have liquidity in the market, good liquidity in the market for that transaction. That's ultimately what drives a lot of our decision making in terms of negotiated versus competitive. I'm selling $100 million deal in the market as the city of Chicago, can probably wager that I'll have decent liquidity and in a competitive situation, depending on the credit and the time and other things. But for $1 billion, and city of Chicago issued a lot of $1 billion transactions, I couldn't tell you that there's always going to be good liquidity in the market, in particular at all points in the curve, and at which point then you need a much more negotiated process in order to manage an efficient entry and exit into and out of the market. So, just going back to transparency, liquidity, I think that there's a lot of really important benefits that are accrue to all of us in the municipal market if we can create more of that transparency and liquidity through a host of means, including investment in technology. But that is a bit of what I think, at least from one issuer's perspective, informs some of that negotiated competitive decision making.
Consider that one issuer accounts for a considerable part of the market. Matter, I just got a 2-minute high sign. Is that...
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think overall, to Megan's point, and Megan, I'm sorry, I can't see you. You're in front of me on the screen here, but Bethany as well. We have a fair number of transactions that actually originate out of Ohio. And I think in terms of leveling the playing field, a lot of this boils down to how can firms process one deal or 1,000 deals consistently with folks who have the information in real time at their fingertips. One particular example was one of these deals, the CFO of the county of Ohio actually retired. And folks were wondering, where is all this information? Well, typically it could be lost in emails, right? Or with authorized permissions and credentials, right? A new CFO is able to jump right into that position, have all the performance metrics, have all the analytics, understand how the deal came to life without any issues at all. And I think those are things that we need to strive for every issuer. Every deal, whether it's $1 million deal, a $250,000 note deal for a fire truck, or $1 billion GO deal here in Chicago, you would hope that the information is readily available and accurate as well.
A couple of questions came in here before we have to wrap. One is in terms of data and analytics, what can EMA/MSRB do to provide better tools to issuers and other primary market stakeholders? You don't have to answer that since you already said I'm not speaking as part of the MSRB, but if you would like to offer that as an independent observation, I'm sure.
Sure. So not speaking on the MSRB, but as an issuer, I think that, and I mentioned this already, I think more transparent information about our trading so for example, a lot of our trades are very small trades, and small trades does not make a primary issuance. And so more data around that, I think, would be helpful. I think two-sided information would also be helpful to the market. We know that investors and, banks and others in this industry have access to a lot more information when it comes to, data, pre-trade, secondary market trade data, any sorts of, data sets that, that help to inform where bonds should price. As issuers, we don't. And so I think that that development in that area would be, at least from an issuer's perspective, greatly helpful to helping us understand where our bonds should be pricing.
Thank you. I wish don't you wish you could have a magic wand and make all these things come true all at once? With that, someone, Matt, you got that magic wand? No, not
No,
yet.
definitely not.
Keep working on that. Another question is the lack of innovation, I'm not sure we'll be able to have an answer for this, but is the lack of innovation coming out of IPRIO and MMD holding back the primary from a technology perspective? I don't know. Is anyone from IPRIO and MMD here to answer that? Yeah, right, exactly. Don't worry, we're dancing around this. We may dance around this one. But I think it's a legit, I think the question, I don't think we can answer that here, obviously, but I think that there is a question in general, without calling out those firms, about innovation from firms that provide key data or charge, very high barriers to access that key data with that, whether or not, that is holding things back. If Megan can't get the data that she needs to look at things, if the data is not coming through quickly and easily accessible, regardless of the firm with this, is that holding us back in some way? I'm going to let that question hang out
I'm
there.
happy to.
You want to
I'll loosely skirt it. I won't answer it directly. I know a little bit about IPRIO. I would say one of the major setbacks that I've witnessed in the decade span of being in the muni market is the tech debt, the infrastructure that originates out of the 80s and 90s is so ingrained in the market that instead of rebuilding the house from scratch, we're busy fixing a shingle or reinstalling a window. And at some point in time, that, generally speaking, has major implications to forward momentum overall for many different people.
Well, it's 4 o'clock, so we've got to stop, unfortunately. But Jenny, thank you.
Thank you.
Bethany, thank you. And Megan, thank you as well. Matt, appreciate it. Thank you. Big round of applause for everybody. I think so. Thanks, everyone. Thank you.